The CBS television and iHeartRadio political analyst, the former KGO brother. How about it for Gary Dietrich? Look at you, you successful fool. I love it. How do you sort out this controversy around Joe Biden and the top of ticket controversy that's emerged on the Democratic side?
Well, you don't sort it out easily, Mark. That's the problem. I mean, this controversy, as you know, started a long time ago. It started, at the beginning of the presidential primary season. There were people forget this. You may remember, Mark, but when Biden ran here in 2020, he intimated that he would probably be a one-term president. Do you remember that?
Almost certainly, yeah. Yeah, he'd said he was going to be one term, yeah.
It's going to be kind of a bridge to the next generation. Then things morphed. Then he adopted the position that he was the only one that could beat Trump. And, here we are now. So this is an exceptionally challenging time. Mark, I've been doing this 35 years. I've worked on campaigns, legislative to presidential, as you know. I'm strictly nonpartisan about this stuff. I do not have a horse in the race. But I have never seen the kind of chaos we are seeing now with a party trying to choose its nominee. I mean, we did have things like, for example, in 1976, Reagan challenged, at the convention, there were a lot of Reagan signs saying he should be the guy, not Gerald Ford. In 1980, the Lion of the Senate, Ted Kennedy, was rumored to be a guy that should be the nominee, not Jimmy Carter. We know how both of those turned out. Not well for the sitting president.
Sure.
So this is going to be an extreme challenge. I think I heard your last guest just kind of sign off with saying, it's going to have to take Joe Biden stepping aside. Right now, that doesn't look likely. Apparently, a lot of heavy hitters, especially in the Democratic Party donor base, which is split on this whole question, are waiting to see what the polls are going to look like here in the next week or two. But this is an absolute mess. And what's truly ironic about it, to me, is that in 1968, when the Democratic Convention, as it is now, is going to be in Chicago, remember, Johnson stepped aside before then, said, I will not accept, nor will I, seek the Democratic nomination. It is just remarkable that we're back there again.
I'm glad you mentioned the convention because I want to ask you about that. One of the things that Cenk, our last guest was mentioning was the fact that the mess that we think of these conventions being when there is no candidate chosen. In this particular narrative, for example, it would be a lot of people scrambling for delegates, et cetera. He said, it's not as big a mess as you think. Sure, it gets a lot of media attention and everybody's talking about various issues and arguing about platforms, but he said, it's not that bad. What is your sense of the mess that would be that convention?
Don't take it from me. Take it from Democratic Party officials themselves, because here's the deal. This is a multi-step process if you're going to select somebody else other than Joe Biden. Number one, he already has delegates that are pledged to them. They can't just wander off the Joe Biden reservation on their own. Step one, he would have to release his delegates. That's number one. Number two, you have then, okay, so what happens next? Well, you go to a brokered convention, which simply means you have open ballots. Names get put into nomination, and then those get voted on. Now, why is that so problematic? Because many people have already pointed out the fact, I don't know, we have a Democratic vice president who herself ran for the presidency. Let's remember that, last time around. So, the problem becomes the mechanics of it. Is Joe Biden willing or even inclined in the slightest bit to even consider releasing his delegates? That's number one. Number two, there's a strong sense that if you do that and start throwing the gates wide open, the only person legally right now that can inherit the Biden-Harris campaign war chest, because those dollars were given to reelect those two, is Kamala Harris. She's the only one that could do that. So the rest would be starting at ground zero for fundraising, et cetera. Plus the Biden-Harris campaign machine, of course, is already in place. So these notions that you're going to have Gretchen Whitmer and Gavin Newsom and a whole host of other people, and this is just going to become kind of a big lottery where you can start pulling names out of a hat. It just simply, the mechanics of it, Mark, do not work that way.
So you're suggesting, excuse me, you're suggesting, you see, young people or younger people cough, Mr. President, too. By the way, just on that, he should have, I thought, acknowledged, even if he didn't really have a cold. But I'm going to give him that generally honest guy probably did have a cold. Why not just say, and my apologies in advance if my voice sounds a little whatever, if I have to cough, I'm fighting a little bit of a cold or whatever. It would have been a way to, by the way, wouldn't have been enough, but I'm suggesting probably should have started with it. Go ahead. What's
CNN team? We're banging away, on his people. And finally, halfway through the debate, apparently got the word that he had a cold. But they were asking the question themselves, why didn't your staff just tell us that in advance? And we could, even the moderators could have said, hey, thanks for showing up. We understand, your voice may be a little bit of a challenge. We've got you properly mic'd. We're glad to have you. I mean, you could have, something like that could have ensued. And it would have gone a long way, to your point, Mark, of at least sort of blunting some of the early shock value.
Yeah, exactly. Because a lot of people, in fact, most people, maybe myself included, most focused on the first 30 minutes. I mean, you get your judgment, you get your snapshot, and if that pulls you along, great. But if not, in this case, I think people made up their mind quickly, and the first 30 minutes were pretty ugly. So you've taken us through, and what I was going to say then was, it sounds to me, Gary Dietrich, as though there just isn't really a practical way that Biden would leave top of ticket for two reasons, one of which is he's likely not inclined, to use your word. You didn't say that. I said that. But you said he'd have to be inclined. I'm saying he's likely not inclined, just based on what I've read. And number two, all those particulars that you laid out, it sounds like a fairly daunting notion to try to ramp up a political campaign for president in the short time you have left.
Well, make no mistake about it, though. I mean, what I've said is it's not easy and it would be messy. I think anybody that thinks otherwise, you better call the DNC, because that's their argument right now for sticking with Joe Biden, is that it would be difficult and cumbersome. But there is a flip side to that, Mark, that is interesting. Some people in the party are advancing, and that is, hey, you know what? As you know, Mark, political conventions increasingly have been seen as snooze fests. The time allotted to them on primetime TV has been cut to almost nothing. A lot of them have been actually taped, and later on, we'll put the acceptance speech on, at like 10:30 or after our local news. That's what they've come to. This paints a whole different picture. And there is a segment already of the Democratic Party saying, wait a minute, why not completely turn this whole narrative on its head? Let's energize the young base, energize us. Let's put this convention back on the map the way it used to be, when you had 3 hours of prime time every night by the major networks covering the evening session of a convention in its entirety. I mean, Mark, this would be the biggest political reality show of our lifetimes were this to happen. And I think there's some in the Democratic Party that say, look, the narrative has got to change. Thursday night was supposed to do that. Why not have a huge buildup to August in Chicago and let's let it rip?
Yeah, I mean, there is something to that, and increasingly, I'm taking a meeting on that. I've been so reluctant to embrace it, but I do think we're in a very tough situation, and this new SCOTUS decision just reminds me of not that I needed a reminder, but this is a real right-wing crew waiting to get in. I know you can't really opine on that part. Those are my opinions. But, I mean, I think, as I was saying last half hour, the wolf's at the door. And you don't need to hear the barking much louder than you're hearing. Does the SCOTUS decision, the Roe decision, these latest decisions may, unless people follow politics or follow this stuff, it seems to me they may not land as heavily. Certainly the Roe decision really landed loudly. How does that affect in polling that you've seen?
Yeah, the Roe decision is probably the only one of the ones you've mentioned, Mark, that moves the actual needle of polling. And here's why. Because it was so personal for so many people, right? I mean, that's the thing about abortion. You cannot get away from that issue having an amazingly resonant personal impact for people on both sides. Because everybody knows somebody, right, who's either wrestled with that decision or had an abortion or chose not to have one or has strong, faith perspectives on it, moral perspectives on it, whatever it is. And the things like the presidential immunity, the things like the cases last week, they don't have the same impact that this one does. Now, this, as you know, today's immunity decision by SCOTUS has a tremendous impact on this particular election cycle because, by all accounts, doesn't matter which network you're tuning into, what their political bent is, this is going to make it very, very difficult for that January 6th case against Trump to go forward before the election. That's going to have real political implications. The other thing about it is it feeds into the narrative that the courts have been politicized. What's interesting to me about that, Mark, is it depends on the issue, on the person in front of the court, and on the level of the court, that is federal, state, or local, but whether you think something's been politicized, right? That's been a huge part of the Trump argument for months. But when it hits the other side, then they're hitting that narrative. And I will simply say this, as a nonpartisan person, and Mark, it is my role, CBS and iHeart, to play that. But also, I take a bigger picture view of these things. As we need to preserve American democracy. We need to preserve every branch of government in its integrity, or the entire system is going to implode and crumble. And so my concern, Mark, my larger concern is that all these narratives that the courts have been politicized this way or that way, depending on your perspective, does real damage to a judicial system that is absolutely vital to have in a democracy.
Yeah, but it's vital to have an objective, fair judicial system, isn't it, Gary? I mean, you can't. I understand, and I think I agree. My dad was a constitutional lawyer, and we used to talk about. We go round and round and round about the courts all the time, and he agrees with you. He said, yeah, the courts we always hear about how the courts are political. Of course, the Supreme Court's always been political. They've always been political appointments. In other words, they're informed in part by politics, was his feeling. But it shouldn't be purely political, I guess, is the way you hope decision making is coming down, right?
Absolutely. And let's make no mistake about it. People need to remember, court justices at every level, at the California Supreme Court, those people are appointed by the governor, right? And they do come up for election, but other than Rose Bird, most people won't even remember that name because so long ago. But the reality is courts, and at the federal level, the Supreme Court, of course, the president nominates those folks. They have to be confirmed by a Senate. We'll remember Judge Bork was not confirmed, right? And others were under heavy scrutiny. Clarence Thomas, Justice Kavanaugh, and people on both sides could say, well, that justice, they were appointed by ex-president and confirmed by the Senate when it was in XYZ party hands. The reality is you cannot take political perspectives out of the court. But I think my contention, Mark, is we don't want it to be the focus of the court. And unfortunately, right now, that appears to be the case more and more.
I blame the court for that a bit, Gary. They've taken an aggressive, and again, these are my opinions, I think they've taken an aggressive right-wing stand, very business-friendly. We knew they'd be business-friendly, but aggressively corporate-friendly, particularly if you look at the overthrow of Chevron, which we just got word on Friday. All right, so now I want to move quickly to Gavin Newsom before I lose you. Give me your thoughts about Gavin Newsom in the state of California.
Well, I think Gavin Newsom, it is clearly a mixed bag for the governor. He sees himself, no doubt, as one of the champions of progressive politics and certainly of the Democratic Party nationally. All you have to do is look at the last year, Mark. I was down at the GOP debate, for CBS at the Reagan Library last fall. Who shows up in the GOP debate spin room? Gavin Newsom. I've never seen somebody from the other party in a presidential primary spin room debate. And here he comes walking in the side door. I'd gotten word that he was going to be there, him and his security deal. People were shocked. I wasn't. Because I said, what are you going to do? Keep the governor out? They said, was he invited? I said, it's the state of California. Of course he's. And then last week, take last week, okay? All of a sudden, after months and months of delay for a constitutionally mandated State of the State address, we always get those in January, maybe February. It was scheduled for March. He put it off 3 months. All the press corps in the state capitol was saying, where is he? Finally, last week, what a shock. 2 days before he's going to fly to Atlanta and be a surrogate for the Biden-Harris ticket, we get a 27-minute, I'd call it an audition tape by the governor with a music bed. Mark, you're a Hollywood, you're an LA Hollywood production guy. People are saying, what was that? And they're saying, and the Capitol is saying, I know what it wasn't. It wasn't a State of the State address. And then let me put the icing on the cake, my brother. All of a sudden, you may have heard that last week these are all completely coincidental, of course, Mark. And yes, people, that was air quotes on the podcast. So here's the deal. He all of a sudden announces last week, he and the First Lady, the first partner, as they call her, that they're moving. They live just a couple of miles away from me, by the way, here in the suburbs of Sacramento. They're moving the family basically to Marin County, out of here. We're out of Sacramento. I will tell you, Mark, there's a strong feeling in Sacramento that the governor's basically checked out for the most part of California. They're dealing with homelessness. Yeah, he's involved, but his aspirations are now clear. And after Thursday night, I think even more clear.
Wow, what a great run on Gavin Newsom. I guess it's true. I mean, we always, as you just have said, knew that he was looking to, move into the big show. Although I got to say, being governor of California is a pretty big show. But yeah, he's good too. He's an effective communicator. He's an insanely good spinner. When you talk about that spin room thing, he's good, man. I'm thinking, holy cow, where did this guy come from? He's really, he knows how to crank it up. But, let's face it, being governor and doing a lot of things related to that job in Sacramento is related to governance. And so that's a whole other standard, and we can get to that another time. But yeah, that's quite an interesting, as you suggest, reflection of his real aspirations. What's that? Go ahead.
You see publications like the San Francisco Chronicle, the Sacramento Bee, and all the bees that are up and down the valley in Fresno, Medicinal. When you see them questioning the governor's motives and saying he needs to stay home and govern California, he's spending too much time bashing people in Texas, Florida, and going after people in red states with his $10 million contribution to a PAC to do that, they're saying, listen, we got to get things under control here. There's a lot of concerns. When you're hearing that from those kind of outlets, that speaks pretty loudly.
Yeah, fair enough. Find the great Gary Dietrich across the CBS television network and also across the iHeartRadio network. And you'll find him here now on Mondays. I most excitedly welcome you back and look forward to next week. Thank you, Gary Dietrich. All the best, pal. Hi, it's Mark, and I thought that was great. Hit the notification bell. You'll know whenever there's a new video being dropped, and please subscribe to our channel to help us save the universe.